go. Let's wait for a couple of people to come in. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to this afternoon's final session, Keynote. I've got a housekeeping notice to make. So all of the posters are now up. They're on the corridor, sort of going down to where we eat. They weren't all up earlier, so make sure you have a look at the posters. And I was also told to welcome the online people. Hello, online people. It's a shame you can't be here in Cardiff. It's sunny. Welcome to the last keynote of the day, which is Josie Fraser. So Josie's currently, I'm going to get your title right here, Josie, the ICT Strategy Lead in brackets Children's Capital at Leicester City Council, where she's led on the ICT Strategy and Sustainable Investment for Leicester's £380 million Building Schools for the Future programme. I'm sure if you work in the UK and elsewhere, most of you will know Josie from, I'm going to try and list off some of your various roles now, Josie. Twitter and her excellent blog, but her previous work, including her own consultancy job, she led work on Green ICT for JISC, worked with Childline, cyberbullying, Web 2.0, the Emerge Web 2.0 projects for JISC, and those early EduBlog awards, which some of us. So basically, I'd be happy to have Josie keynote any conference, but when we were thinking about the theme for this one, of mainstream, I was at a conference with Josie in Berlin, and she was telling me that she was planning to implement OER across schools in Leicester. And I think some of us, and I'm kind of looking at myself here, talk about all these kind of big ideas but never actually do anything, whereas Josie's one of those people who kind of actually gets on and does stuff. And so she's set about implementing the first major OER in UK schools, and what she's going to talk about today. So I know it's going to be a great talk, so please give a nice welcome to Josie Fraser.
Thank you for that lovely welcome, for making me feel a little bit old. Yes, because it is true, I have been around forever in EdTech circles, and I think internet years probably equivalent to about 7 per year, so that does make me pretty ancient. I'm really, really happy to be here today to talk to you all, and the conference theme, mainstreaming open education, is really close to the work that I've currently been doing in Leicester with primarily with secondary schools, but also with primary schools, around open licensing, open education resources, and kind of copyright issues in general. So I'm really pleased to be here to talk about that today. I'm also interested, in terms of the mainstream, I'm interested in how all of our learners and all of our young people and children can benefit from OER. I work at kind of citywide level, so I'm not so much interested in how well individual schools are doing. What I'm interested in is that any learner in my city can go to one of those schools, get an excellent experience of their education, can benefit from a really, really great environment that supports them taking opportunities. So I'm looking at it from that kind of aspect. And I know earlier on we had a conversation. We've been talking a little bit about kind of disruptive business models today already, and about learners and learning communities benefiting financially. My talk's going to look a bit more around kind of digital literacy, social inclusion and social engagement as kind of drivers for the work that I've been doing. Okay, so some background. For those of you not fortunate enough to have been to Leicester yet, and a few of you in the audience who have been sorely disadvantaged in that way, that's where it is. So you know now, no excuse. England. It's a largish sized town, to use the technical term. We have a young population, so I think it's about 27% of our population at the age of 19, which is not typical for lots of places. And we celebrate, and we're rightly proud of our diversity, our ethnic and cultural diversity in the city, which we're very famous for, so you may well know that Leicester's associated with that. We're a very upbeat town, but we also have quite high levels of comparative poverty. Around 1 in every 3 of our young people live in comparative poverty, so we have a lot of social issues, and our young people face a lot of challenges. So the work that I've been doing that Martin talked about very briefly is I head up the tech strand of the Building Schools programme, which looks at 23 schools, primarily secondary, so that's supporting learners from 11 to 19, although some of the schools support junior school learners and some of the schools have sixth formers. There is a larger spread. We've got approximately 2,000 staff in those 23 schools and approximately 20,000 learners. And they do support the majority of young people in the city. Not all of them, but the vast majority. And amongst those schools, there's a spread too. So we have very large mainstream schools as well as kind of middle-type mainstream schools, and they have diverse populations within them. We also have SEN schools, special education schools, for a range of learners, from young people with moderate learning disabilities to young people with life restricting disabilities and severe multiple disabilities as well. So as a community and as a group, we're even more diverse than we are just by being in Leicester. Okay, so the work that I've been doing is obviously to get those new and refurb buildings built. But importantly, the work that I've been doing is supporting school communities and teachers in particular in making best use of the technologies that we're putting into those schools for their communities. I'm going to talk about that project today. Before I get to the kind of practical hands-on bits though, I just want to raise two themes. These aren't things that I'm going to look at resolving today at all, but I just want us to kind of think and consider. So the first theme is obviously mainstream, and I've chosen to represent this with Main Street USA from Florida. I'm sure there are some Disney audience who might recognise that. And really why I wanted to just raise this is to think a little bit more about the meaning of mainstream. So those of you who have read Martin Weller's excellent book, The Battle for Open, there was there for that book from Martin. Martin deals massively with kind of the recuperation of OER in that book, going through different areas. And in terms of that kind of context, we can think of the mainstream as, being synonymous with privilege, as kind of privileging or even sometimes fetishizing a very normative subject, and being exclusionary, and also being quite tolerant of difference and tokenizing difference rather than actually embracing difference. And there's also kind of, as a theme that's come up today, is the kind of symbiotic relationship between the mainstream, commercial and capital interest as well, which we can't separate. It's not one thing or the other. But there's also other ways of thinking about the mainstream as inclusive, about recognising that diversity that we actually have, and about valuing differences. The internet now is mainstream in many, many countries. It's part of the social, cultural, economic and political everyday life. It includes different people. It in some ways in some ways supports, reiterates, enforces privilege, but it also gives us spaces to challenge that privilege as well. Now, my second thing that I wanted people to think about is quick round of guess the meme. Does anybody know what? Okay, so you're all young, which is good. Okay, so this is called Eternal September. And Eternal September is the time that we've been online since September 1993. And Marcates is a time when America Online began to make Usenet available to more people than just those people in American colleges and universities. Prior to this time, Usenet users would annually complain about the influx of new graduates that are coming online, who didn't understand the kind of social mores and the established etiquette, who didn't know how to behave in those environments, and people would get annually very, very upset about that influx. And what would happen with those people is that they would either drop off, they wouldn't be interested, or they would become assimilated into that culture. But from that point on, Wendy Grossman describes it as the sheer and endless number of new users overwhelmed the network's existing social norms. Why that's important to us is because now the mainstream is internet, eternal September will never end. New people are being born all the time. New people are coming online all the time. New services and sites are developing all the time. There will always be new people overwhelming existing norms and practices. And that's very relevant for this community, I think, in terms of where we are now and where we want to be in terms of establishing and being part of a mainstream. Okay. So, talking a bit more about the directly to do with the project. This is digitaleicester.com, and this is the website that we round up kind of all of the resources and support things from the Digital at Leicester project. This was a 2-year research project that was worked with Leicester City Council, the Montfort University with Richard Hall, Lucy Atkins as the research lead, and the 23 schools that are in the BSF programme. Digital literacy is critical for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons it's critical is because if the internet is mainstream, if online environments and digital environments are part of our everyday life, then actively participating in those environments and being able to critically engage with those environments is really important. It's really important because otherwise we are assuming a passive role and we are assuming a very kind of consumer-driven and led role within those things. So digital literacy is important in terms of us being able to engage, challenge, develop our environments. What digital literacy is, I would argue, is situated in practice and is dependent on role. For us in this room, as kind of citizens, there are basic digital literacy practices that we all need that will help us, that will support us in our kind of day-to-day life, that will keep us safe, that will make our online experiences rich and pleasant ones rather than horrible ones. There are also a set of different skills that are role dependent, specifically I think for educators and for learners, and also they're not necessarily the same for different groups of educators and learners as well. I think there is going to be some difference between the literacy skill set of young people at a university versus primary school teachers as groups. So it's a situated in practice thing. And what the project that we did was importantly looked at two things. One, working with our community, what is that definition for our community? What are those things that are important in terms of the digital literacies that people working in the secondary school sector need to have to support their practice? And the second thing was to use that definition then to identify gaps and strengths across the city. So that was at citywide level, school level and at individual level as well, to try and inform and structure the work that came out and the work that we did. So there's two strands here that are on the screen: finding, evaluating and organising, and creating and sharing. And these were two of the key strands of practice. Now, if you think about what a school staff member does every day, it won't be that dissimilar to what other educational professionals do every day. It involves digital resources. Every day, people are looking for, evaluating, finding, using, creating, sharing digital resources. That's the kind of nature of the work that they're involved in. It's a core part of professional practice. But what we found is that there's big gaps within that professional practice, and a lot of those gaps were around copyright issues and licensing issues. So staff were not confident or familiar with issues of copyright. They had not heard of open licenses. The majority had never heard of open educational resources, and many of them didn't know what Creative Commons was and hadn't come across that. Now, obviously, if you have got a whole profession, and I don't see any reason to think that Leicester is unrepresentative of the profession as a whole, if you have a profession that doesn't understand or know about a whole bunch of stuff that is actually online, then they can't access that. And in addition to that, they can't connect to those communities they can't share their own things, they can't practice in those kind of connected ways. So this was big gap that the project identified and which led in to the work. Okay, so current school practice, just to characterise for those of you who aren't familiar with schools, aren't working in schools, aren't school governors. A couple of ways of characterising it. Relationship of many school staff is on a spectrum in terms of copyright, which I've called quiet anxiety to giddy exceptionalism. Giddy exceptionalism, many people in universities will recognise it's education kind of approach to copyright and to using things. Majority of staff hadn't heard of OER-related issues, and many staff were not aware of intellectual property issues as it related to them and their employment. And I'll talk a little bit more about employment and IP ownership in a bit. On the plus side, what we do have in our schools that we should all be proud of is a culture of sharing. There is a massive culture of sharing, of informal sharing that does go on. Staff are not typically hoarding things away, and they're not typically not interested in, passionate about, wanting to use other people's resources to support their learners and wanting to develop other people's resources to support their learners. So we do have a really exciting culture to build on. And they are producing fantastic, effective resources. They may not be the all singing, all dancing things that you would buy at commercial vendors, but they're producing high quality, very effective things that are benefiting learners. So the approach that we took to kind of support staff in relation to this was to a few things. The first thing was the production of the school's guidance, and I've brought along today, you can find on the front desk, some copies of the OER guidance. Now this document contains the four key guidance documents that I'll talk through in a minute, packaged in a nice handy package for you there. So please do take one with you and have a look. But the aim was to provide accessible guidance for school staff to support them in understanding and making use of open licensing. And importantly, to support them in creating and sharing open educational resources. Okay. So, we've created the guidance, which is a suite of 4 things. We've also created practical resources, and everything that we've created is issued under open licence and is available from Leicester City Council Schools Extranet. It's a special open to the world. Normally you need a password to get into that, but that's the schools page where the schools resources are. If you want to have a look at the usefulness of the resources and guidance for the FE and HE sector, you can have a look at Durham. Durham have taken the guidance and they've repurposed it already as well. The guidance has also been translated into a few different languages by the Virtual African University too. So there's lots of use already being made of it. It is being developed and it is reasonably robust in what use it is. The guidance also fed into a bunch of activities that we did around. So at the end of January we held a big conference for all the schools. We had, I think, about 92 people turn up from about 48 to 50 schools, which was fantastic. And that gave us an opportunity to actually look at some of the issues. And I know there's some people in the audience who came along to that conference and event as well. We've also been doing some school workshops, discussions with senior leadership, and I'm lining up to do a governor's workshop quite in the near future too. In terms of the guidance, it's split into 4 key sectors. What are open educational resources? And in terms of that, what we've contextualise it, so about sticking a licence on something, although obviously that is a kind of a key part of open educational resources, but we have tried to stress the broader issues around equality, access to education that informs and in which open practice and OER are embedded. We've also tried to stress the range of issues relating to the production of OER. This was a this was quite a tricky one to do actually, and I'll talk again in a little bit, but obviously the licenses themselves provide that legal freedom, but there are a range of other freedoms that are really important and to kind of consider and to understand around OER, and that's included in the first guidance booklet too. Second one is looking at what is an open license. Third one is looking at finding and remixing openly licensed resources. And alongside that, there's practical walkthroughs for staff, and these have been really valuable for supporting our staff in visualising and looking at how to use OER in their practice. So there's one screenshot of the Wikipedia guide, so how to use the Wikipedia book tool to curate and create topic books, either for staff or for students. Lots of staff didn't know that that was available to them. This gives them a very simple walkthrough of how to do that. There's a similar thing around Flickr as well, how to, instead of just Googling and finding images for your presentation, actually how to find Creative Commons licensed images, how to simply accredit them as well and use them. And then the fourth section is obviously looking at how do I license my own resources, and this is one of the trickier ones that came about. And linked to this was, of course, the issue of permission for staff that I'm going to talk about a bit more now. So this wasn't part of the project, and it wasn't part of the project outputs that we produced, but it was necessary to do in terms of to be able to support staff in actually creating things. So we have given permission for 82, I think, 84, sorry if I'm a bit wrong with that one, but around that number of schools in the city. We're unusual in the city at the moment because we have a majority of community schools and we have one voluntary controlled school. Many cities don't at the moment. There is obviously quite a few academies, and there's quite a few free schools, and there's also quite a lot of voluntary aided or religious schools across the country too, and we in Leicester as well. We're the employer of the community and voluntary controlled schools, so we're not the employer of the academies, for example. Their employer is the governing body. But we, as Leicester City Council, as the local authority for these schools. Now, by default, as employer, we get IP rights over the work that our employees are creating and producing. Sometimes you'll have in your contract of work a statement about that, and it will tell you, you know, we claim IP on this work. When you produce this, we retain these rights. But you don't necessarily get that in all school contracts, and you don't have to put that in legally necessarily. Obviously, it's better practice too. But that obviously means that there's many staff that don't actually understand that part of the legal framework that they're operating with in regard to their employment. So it doesn't extend to stuff that staff are doing outside of their working space or in their own time for their own purposes, but it does extend to stuff that people are doing within the workplace. So by giving permission for staff to openly license the resources that they're creating, what we've done is swept away that issue in terms of informality. So they don't have to just do it, hope that nobody turns up and says, why have you done that? And they don't have to find somebody to ask specific permission about with that. And that's something that I'm very, very proud that we've done as a council. We're the first council in the UK to have done that. And I very much hope that we will support other local authorities and other school employees in doing that as well, in taking that step forward. We recommend CC BY 4.0 in line with the kind of EU and UK government recommendations, but we don't enforce that. That's our recommendation. Okay, so this is the dolphin break. Okay, we can have some dolphins. Okay, so some of you will be loving this and thinking, oh, lovely dolphins. I'm actually not very keen on nature in general, and I particularly dislike dolphins. I know it's a bold statement. I know I'll be hounded now by dolphin lovers. It's true that I don't like them. So this slide isn't calming for me, it's making me quite angry. So why I've got this really is that if you have a look in the guidance, you will see a lot of dolphins. Okay? And the reason there's a lot of dolphins in the guidance is because we had so many iterations and so many discussions in our attempts to actually refine this, to make this practically useful for staff, to get staff's opinion in it, to actually create stuff, to edit and edit and edit, to produce something that was actually useful and accessible, that I ran out of the will to argue about the dolphins. And I let it slide. And now I have to live with it until I have the time and space to actually just do my own version, because it's under CC BY, so I can take them out and replace them with something, electricity pylons, I don't know, something else, something more pleasant. Okay, so developing the guidance, these were the issues that took up a huge amount. The definition of OER, now not in terms of which thing, those kinds of inflections that I'm sure you're all common with, it wasn't that, it was with the complexity of the term, because what I really didn't want us to have is something that situated OER within the kind of networks of other types of practice and considerations, which I illustrated a little bit before with that kind of thing about technological freedom and legal freedoms and all of that. What I didn't want is something so prescriptive that people went, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. How am I possibly going to remember I've got to do this, and this, and then it's an OER? Or how am I going to get through that gateway? What I'm interested in is our staff just put a CC license on that picture that you've used that people can make use of. Just take that first step. So we're very careful around that. The other issue is around how we describe the open education community, because what I didn't want us to seem like was you guys as a bunch of people who've been in the, down the pub for the last 3 years, and you've made your mind up about all of this stuff, and you've had these discussions, and you're all on best terms with each other, you're all good friends. How then do I, as somebody who's never heard of Creative Commons licensing, access that community? How do I become an open educational practitioner? So there's lots of discussion about how we could make you guys seem more friendly. Then in some cases you are, but in many cases, no, you are that friendly, so that was good. Okay, so accessibility of text, and that's much more to do with, that's much more to do with kind of use of terms that people would not be familiar with, that would hijack what they were trying to do. So a great example of that is metadata. If you just throw metadata in to somebody who's panicking about whether they have been breaking the law for the last 3 years and if there's going to be any terrible consequences, it doesn't help. So we were very careful to contextualise any kind of technical or specialist language that we used as well. Obviously, the licence recommendation, we had a lot of discussion about the legal position of staff and how to approach that, how to break the bad news in many cases to staff about their position. We had a lot of discussions, and obviously the dolphin issue that I'll live with. Okay, so in terms of the schools, what was the schools' comeback, and what did they say? These are the 3 areas I'm most concerned with. 1, what's an open licence? They'd never seen one. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know if they had to go somewhere special to get it. They didn't know if they had to pay for an open licence. They didn't know lots of things about open licences that they need to know, and that they need to be able to feel safe enough to have those conversations and find out about. And you know, how does that then work? Put that on? Where do I have to put that on? Do I have to accredit everything, or can I get away with it sometimes? Other issues were around property and employment, and kind of issues around that. And interestingly, in that category, students came up as well, because students obviously own their own IP. They're not employees. They own their own IP, although in many universities, students are obliged to really enter into an agreement with their organisation that gives their organisation IP rights over their works. So it's a huge area. In the school sector, that's nothing like that happens, but there's not really an appreciation that those students actually own their IP, and not you as their teacher. And obviously issues of quality control and management were rife in terms of that. Okay, I'm going to finish now. The timekeeping person will be glad to know. I'm going to quickly race through these last ones. So 3 things really. 1, license types. I've had so many passionate arguments. Well, no, I've not actually argued. I've just listened. People are very happy to just talk to you about why the license preference is really important. And I know it's a conversation that many of you in this room will be a bit bored of, and that has, has a long history. But this argument is brand new to many people. They've never heard of open. And then you're like, oh, there's loads of different license types, and they mean these different things. People have to go on that journey themselves, and people have to be supported in having that discussion as an individual and as a community in terms of what license they want to use and why they want to use that. There's a bunch of key questions that we need to ask schools, not just schools in Leicester, but schools across the country and across Europe, I think, which is about whether they know anything about open licensing, whether they know about IP, and how can you support your staff in actually working more openly and sharing things. In terms of kind of key issues, I've got 2, really, these 2 staff issues. One issue is awareness, making sure that staff actually have access to OER because they know what OER is, they know how to find them, and they basically know how to use them. And that is so important, and we're not there, particularly in the school sector, we're nowhere near there. The second area is around licensing agreements. Can I, as a staff member, openly license my things? There's lots of stuff about different freedoms in terms of what the license permits, but if I haven't got that essential freedom in the first place to put out my stuff under an open license, then it's very, very difficult to move forward. In terms of students, obviously, the issues that kick down into the kind of everyday are 1, modelling practice. We've got staff in our schools who are giving presentations to kids who are creating resources that have open licenses on them, or that use openly licensed things and have credited them. And that's very, very powerful, whether you're standing at the front of a classroom or you're working online, to be modelling that practice to your learners. Whether they pick up on what's going on or not, it's a very powerful argument for practice and education of young people. There are curriculum opportunities involved in the work, so one of our primary school teachers has already taken some of the practical work and has created a 6-part lesson plans that are mapped to the Key Stage 2 primary computing curriculum that she's using with her students now. And obviously, there's the whole issue about IP rights management, which I think is not going to go away, and that we need to kind of have a look at much more as communities, both in schools and universities. Thank you very much.
Josie gets I loves the diff bag as well. Although I do think my choice of toy dolphin may be misjudged now. But
thank you very much. So
I think we do have some time for some questions. That's right. Yeah.
Fantastic.
That's suspicious fun.
Do you want to put people who want to, what make us
Sorry, I don't think, is this working? Oh, is it? Okay. Sorry, my name is Dominic Lukash, Dyslexia Action. I want to ask, First, I want to appreciate the fact that you mentioned accessibility and special needs, because that's the area I'm from, and that's where OERs can make a huge amount of difference. But the one area where they could make particular difference is the key text, the key curriculum text, not just the stuff that the teachers produced, being under an open license and therefore more accessible and being more inclusive. So I just want to ask you, in the OER sort of approach, I mean, are you also focusing on textbooks and things like that, where of course there are commercial world still rules?
Yeah, I mean, we're not at the moment, because we're at the beginning of this journey. The conference that we held was at the end of January, and the permission was rolled out to schools at the beginning of October with the guidance. So our work is very much at the beginning of that process. One of the things that people are interested in, though, is the idea of collaborative creation of works, and that has been the kind of collaborative strand of work has been more appealing to people than I actually thought it would be. There is a lot of interest in actually working across numbers of organisations to create stuff. So no, we're not there yet, but it is definitely an anchored idea in terms of where people would like to go. That person with the hand up. It's easy to pick them.
So you mentioned that the city council gave permission to the teachers to openly license what they created. Did they? How did they do that? Was it the board voted on it? Did they actually change the teacher contracts so that their new legal guidelines in the contracts themselves? Or kind of what was the operation there?
They've been formally notified. They haven't. It's not included in the teacher contracts yet, but when they are rewritten, there will be a paragraph in there about the permission. So how it was practically enacted was that a very formal statement was provided to the schools, along with notes about questions that they might have, a kind of FAQ about, well, why are we getting this permission? What does it mean? What are the implications for me as a school and as a school leader? What are the kinds of things I should be thinking about? And they all went out to the schools, and they were followed up with obviously the conference and the conversations that we're having on the ongoing basis. So it has been formalised in that sense. We can't take it back from them now, and we have given blanket permission as well. So we haven't said to them, you know, it's up to you whether you do it. We've basically said you can release your learning, anything that you create in terms of learning resources. So whether that's lesson plans or policies or anything else, you can openly license it if you wish to.
So just a quick follow-up. As you know, you can't, it's only the copyright holder that can put an open license on something. So are you or is the school district, the city council, giving the teachers non-exclusive copyright and then saying, now that you have non-exclusive copyright, we also have non-exclusive copyright as a district. Because you have non-exclusive copyright, you can open the license and choose to do so. That's okay.
Yeah, we're giving them permission to license directly. That's the central mechanism of the permission. So they don't have to get us to put the license on, they can do that themselves directly.
I think it's Giles at the back.
Josie, thanks for a great keynote. What influence has the work that you and Leicester have been doing had outside Leicester with other schools, and has it had any influence with government yet?
I'd love to say, yeah, we've changed the world since Christmas. But I would probably be over-egging the situation a little bit. So I think we are, as I said, we're at early days in terms of the work that we've done. It's perhaps not for me, as somebody who's inside the situation, to necessarily comment on what other authorities, other schools, other districts are thinking. My role really is to raise awareness about the work that we're doing, to help promote it and help other people adopt it and make life as easy as possible for them to adopt the approach that we've taken. And one of the ways we've done that is by releasing everything under CC licence and putting that all on our school's internet pages so people can have a look at that and use that and adopt the approach. In terms of the wider government, obviously that's a question for after the election.
It's a very different matter. Is there one down here?
Thanks. Yeah, well, I mean, fantastic work. Well, congratulations on what you've achieved. Just unpicking the question of how individual materials are licensed and the fact that you've actually given that choice to the creators, which is, I think, really quite an important thing. But as we've indicated, the copyright will rest with the City Council. What for a lot of people, and we heard this today in a fantastic presentation about work in Poland, there's a sort of emotional engagement in the whole process with the teachers, which is really important. So have you actually considered the notion of, though the copyright sits with the council, but that there's actually a formal attribution of the people who work in the document?
In terms of moral rights, we're giving them their moral rights with that, and what we suggest is that they, and we're also not being prescriptive about that, because some people don't want to put their names on things. Some people feel more comfortable sharing things without their names on. But yes, in terms of that, they are encouraged to, if they want to, have their own names and their school names on those documents, because one of the important things one of the important reasons and the values for us as a council is that our schools are amazing, our teachers are amazing, they are doing really great work. This is a way of highlighting and profiling the work that they're doing and getting it out there and sharing it with other communities and having that accreditation. What typically will happen is that work gets passed around people and it gets developed and built on, but there's no accreditation given to anybody normally within the school sector. This is a real fantastic opportunity and way of actually saying, yeah, it came from Crown Hills in Leicester. It came from Joe Batch, who is a teacher in one of our primary schools, you know, and also helping raise the profile of individuals and schools that are working in Leicester. So it's a very positive thing for us in that sense.
Thanks, David, and then Alec, and then we're done. Then we can go for beers.
Hi. I thought the presentation and the project seems fascinating, and it's great that all the resources that are developed are being shared openly. Is there also any kind of reflective, or whatever it would be these days, sort of description, blogs, on how the process is ongoing? Because though it sounds as if you've got everything sorted, even with the best of planning, there will be things to learn, I'm sure, as you move on, and that would be particularly useful to many of us who are probably looking at this thinking, oh, that sounds fab. Let's aspects of that, and not only then things like the guides, but the actual reflection on the dolphins and other things are the really useful things.
So I haven't told Bjorn Hassler about the dolphin thing yet, and I was a bit nervous he'd actually be here today, but he may find out about that now. In terms of kind of reflective work, there's a section on the Digital Leicester site that's OER Schools, and what that does is kind of capture all of the sessions and thoughts that went on in the conference. And what we did in that conference was a few things. So we looked at kind of policy issues, we looked at accessibility issues, and had a session on basic accessibility of digital resources to support staff in that way. We looked at the computing curriculum, and we looked at kind of very introductory basic things as well. And what we tried to do with that is kind of create a type of microsite that captured all of that. Obviously, the other things I'm doing, I'm here today to talk to you. I'm going to be around tonight. Happy to have a chat with any of you until it gets too late, and you know, and we will continue to try and do those things and to be as accessible as possible in those. But you're absolutely right, and that's why I tried to angle this talk in the way that I did, because the things that are very useful to us as practitioners and as activists in our communities are those kind of practical. Well, what happened? What questions were asked? What were the issues? How did you get around that? Which was the best to take? Which were the not so good approaches to take? That's the real value for our community, not necessarily the high-end glossy reports about things which are useful but not necessarily as practically useful to us.
Was it you, Dominic, or Alec next? We'll do one of you, and then we'll...
Hi, my name's Dominic. I'm just finishing a report for the OECD on OER, and so of course we're interested in particularly the whole thing from the kind of the policy perspective. So I was just wondering if you could say something about what was the reasons that Leicester City Council got involved or decided to promote OER.
I've got a list somewhere. I'm going to pull out.
No, it's just because at the beginning you mentioned, I think, something that was in the Paris Declaration, but probably you have to be much more specific
in terms of that kind of standard formal policy, then yes, around the UK policy on publicly resourced work, and also on the kind of related EU work, both of which make that recommendation. So that was the kind of policy framing in terms of that part of it, but actually that wasn't the kind of, that was only one element of the benefit and value to us as a council as well, I think, and I think there was many more. One of the things that we've already talked about was around giving schools the opportunity to, showcase their work and to share their value and to raise appreciation of the great work that's going on in our schools. That was definitely a thing. We have a commitment to equality of access of education and access to education for all. We're very passionate about that, and this fits very well into that. This also gives our schools a fantastic opportunity to have a look at how they're dealing with digital materials. Because many of them have kind of slid into this new way of practice, to using technologies, using and creating digital resources without thinking that much about it, or with practice developing as it goes. By introducing this, it's a fantastic way to think about things like, are the resources I've created, are they basically accessible? What kind of resources am I putting out there? What kinds of things do I have that I do want to put out there? So the policy driver was not a big one, but it was a frame. I think there were more important things to our community though.
So we'll wrap up there. Donnie, do any housekeeping notices, Aidan, or anything? Before we do that, can we just have another round of applause, Josie, for a fantastic...
Just a reminder that the drinks reception at the gala dinner begins at 7 p.m. and they're at the National Museum, which is one of the large buildings in our office buildings you can see opposite. If you start from this end, it's the third building along at the front. So if you look at towards town, the third building along, coming up from town, obviously you have to wait when you get there. So 7 o'clock at the National Museum, please leave until then. Thank you for today. Thank you.
Thank you.